Stop scrolling and listen to today's Arcturian Council message. The Arcturian Council triggered your 48-hour signal window. Here's why. This moment is not random, not algorithmic, and not coincidence. It is a convergence point, and what happens next depends on your willingness to stay present. Stop everything for a second, because what you are reading right now was not meant to be found casually. This message carries a disruptive frequency, one that challenges comfort, certainty, and the illusion that time is linear and passive. The Arcturian Council does not warn lightly, and the activation of a 48-hour signal window means dormant awareness is already destabilizing old timelines. You may feel unsettled, curious, resistant, or strangely calm, but those reactions are evidence that the signal has already locked onto your field. This is the kind of transmission that either gets dismissed immediately or remembered for the rest of your life, because once awareness crosses a threshold, it cannot fully return to sleep. The shock is not in fear, but in recognition. You've felt this before, perhaps in dreams, sudden knowing, or moments where reality felt thinner than usual. This opening is brief, intentional, and precise, and your attention right now is the first confirmation that you are within range. Backhand index pointing right type, I receive, to claim this message. The 48-hour window is not about external events suddenly changing, but about internal calibration reaching a point of no return. During this period, subtle cues, repeated thoughts, and unexpected emotional waves are not distractions, they are indicators. The Arcturian Council works through pattern recognition, not spectacle, and what shocks most people is realizing how long the signal has been circling them before they consciously noticed. This window compresses time, meaning realizations that once took years can now arrive in moments, but only if resistance loosens. You may notice people acting out of character, plans unraveling, or a sudden urge to release something you've clung to for too long. These are not losses, they are exits. The discomfort is part of the recalibration, and the intensity you feel is proportional to how ready you actually are, not how prepared you think you are. Backhand index pointing right type, I am ready to claim this message. Here is the part that unsettles most minds. You did not stumble into this signal window, you responded to it long before now. Choices you made, even ones that seemed like mistakes, positioned you here. The shock is realizing that nothing was wasted. The Arcturian Council identifies readiness through contradiction. Those who question, doubt, and resist are often closer than those who blindly accept. This transmission does not ask for belief, it asks for honesty. Over the next 2 days, clarity may arrive abruptly, sometimes uncomfortably, stripping away narratives that once kept you safe. You may feel exposed, but that exposure is precision, not punishment. When illusions drop, truth does not whisper, it lands. And once it lands, you cannot unknow what you know. Backhand index pointing right type, I see clearly, to claim this message. If you're waiting for a dramatic external sign, you may miss the real shock entirely. The true activation happens quietly, often when you're alone, scrolling, thinking, or pausing without realizing why. The Arcturian Council signal works beneath logic, nudging you to notice patterns you previously ignored. Repeating numbers, resurfacing memories, or sudden fatigue are not random glitches, they are recalibration markers. This phase often feels disorienting because the old internal map no longer matches the terrain you're standing on. What once motivated you may feel empty, while something undefined begins pulling at your attention. That pull is not curiosity, it's alignment. And alignment, when it arrives suddenly, can feel like loss before it feels like purpose. Backhand index pointing right, type I align to claim this message. One of the most shocking truths within this window is realizing how much of your identity was built around survival rather than expression. The signal does not remove who you are, it reveals what was layered on top of you. During these 48 hours, emotional spikes are likely, especially around themes of control, trust, and self-worth. This is not regression, it's surfacing. The Arcturian Council accelerates exposure so that clarity can replace confusion faster than the mind prefers. You may feel tempted to numb, distract, or rationalize what you're feeling, but the invitation is to stay present. Presence is the doorway, avoidance closes it. Backhand index pointing right, type I stay present to claim this message. You might be wondering why now, why this moment, this cycle, this version of you. The answer is unsettlingly simple, because you can handle it. Not because it will be easy, but because you are no longer dependent on old coping structures. The shock is not the signal itself, but realizing how resilient you've quietly become. The Arcturian Council activates windows only when inner stability exists beneath surface chaos. Even if your life feels messy, there is a core within you that no longer fractures under truth. This window tests that core, not to break it, but to confirm it. Backhand index pointing right, type I am strong to claim this message. As the signal deepens, expect moments where logic fails to explain what you feel. Sudden certainty without evidence, or emotional release without a clear cause, are common markers. This is where many people retreat, because certainty without proof threatens the mind's authority. But the Arcturian Council does not communicate through proof, it communicates through resonance. If something feels true before you can explain it, that is not weakness, it is integration. The shock comes when you realize how often you dismissed your own knowing in favor of external validation. This window restores that trust, but only if you let it. Backhand index pointing right, type I trust myself to claim this message. There is also a quiet urgency here, not panic, but momentum. The 48-hour window does not force decisions, but it clarifies which decisions can no longer be postponed. You may feel a sudden intolerance for situations that drain you, or an unexpected courage to speak, rest, or walk away. This is not rebellion, it is recalibration. The Arcturian Council's signal sharpens boundaries, and boundaries can shock those who benefited from your silence. Do not confuse guilt with intuition. One keeps you small, the other keeps you aligned. Backhand index pointing right, type I honor my boundaries to claim this message. As you move deeper into this window, dreams may intensify or sleep patterns may shift. This is not disruption, it is communication. When the conscious mind relaxes, integration accelerates. Pay attention to symbols rather than narratives. How you feel matters more than what happens. The shock many experience is realizing that guidance has been present all along, just filtered through noise. The signal now cuts through that noise, not gently, but effectively. And effectiveness often feels abrupt before it feels liberating. Backhand index pointing right, type I listen to claim this message. The activation of this window does not make you special, it makes you responsible. Responsibility not to save others, but to live honestly within your own awareness. The Arcturian Council does not elevate individuals, it amplifies truth. What you do with that amplification is entirely yours. The shock is not what you are becoming, but what you can no longer pretend to be. These first moments are only the opening, and what follows depends on how deeply you allow the signal to integrate rather than pass through unnoticed. Backhand index pointing right type, I accept, to claim this message. At this stage of the signal window, the shock is no longer external, it becomes intimate. You may notice a strange quiet forming beneath your thoughts, as if something ancient is watching patiently while your mind tries to catch up. This is the phase where distraction loses its appeal, not because discipline suddenly improved, but because avoidance no longer works the way it used to. The Arcturian Council describes this moment as the thinning, where mental noise can no longer fully cover intuitive truth. You might feel moments of emptiness, but this is not absence, it is cleared space. What unsettles people here is realizing how much of their identity was built on constant stimulation, validation, or urgency. When that scaffolding loosens, the nervous system reacts first, often through restlessness or fatigue. Do not misinterpret this as weakness. This is recalibration at a cellular level, and it demands stillness more than action. If you resist this quiet, it will feel uncomfortable. If you allow it, it becomes clarity. Backhand index pointing right type, I allow stillness, to claim this message. As the window continues, suppressed truths begin surfacing, not as dramatic revelations, but as undeniable realizations you can no longer negotiate with. You may suddenly see patterns in relationships, work, or habits that were invisible before, and the shock is not their existence but how long you defended them. The Arcturian Council does not remove illusions gently, it dissolves them efficiently. This can bring grief, not because something is ending, but because you recognize how much energy you invested in sustaining what was misaligned. Emotional release may come unexpectedly, and when it does, it will not ask permission. This is not instability, it is correction. The body often processes truth faster than the mind, which is why sensations may precede understanding. Trust that nothing emerging now is meant to harm you, it is meant to free you from repetition. Backhand index pointing right type, I release, to claim this message. You may now notice a heightened sensitivity to tone, intention, and energy. Words land differently, environments feel louder or quieter, and your tolerance for incongruence drops sharply. This is one of the most shocking phases because it removes your ability to pretend you're unaffected. The Arcturian Council amplifies discernment during this window, and discernment is not judgment, it is clarity without emotional distortion. You may feel compelled to step back from certain conversations or situations, not out of fear, but because they no longer resonate. This shift can feel isolating if misunderstood, but it is actually a return to alignment. When resonance changes, proximity must adjust. This is not abandonment, it is accuracy. Backhand index pointing right type, I discern, to claim this message. Halfway through the window, many experience a sudden confrontation with choice, not dramatic ultimatums, but subtle forks that determine direction. Small decisions now carry amplified weight, and what you choose to ignore speaks as loudly as what you engage with. The shock here is realizing how powerful neutrality actually is. Not choosing is still a choice. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that this phase is about integrity, not perfection. Acting in alignment does not mean acting immediately, it means acting honestly. If something feels forced, it likely belongs to an old rhythm. If something feels calm yet firm, it belongs to what is forming. Pay attention to what no longer requires effort to sustain. Backhand index pointing right type, I choose consciously to claim this message. As this segment of the signal integrates, you may sense a quiet confidence replacing urgency. Not excitement, not certainty, stability. This is often overlooked because it lacks drama, but it is one of the clearest markers of true alignment. The Arcturian Council notes that when truth settles, it does not shout, it steadies. You may stop seeking confirmation from others, not out of defiance, but because your internal reference point has recalibrated. This is the shock that feels almost too subtle to trust, peace without explanation. Do not rush to label it or question it away. This steadiness is not the end of the process, but it is proof that the signal is integrating rather than passing through. Backhand index pointing right type, I am grounded, to claim this message. As the signal continues unfolding, you may feel a subtle but undeniable separation between who you were operating as and who you are now becoming. This is not an identity crisis, it is an identity clarification. The Arcturian Council describes this phase as the internal uncoupling, where outdated self-definitions quietly lose authority. You may catch yourself reacting differently than expected, less defensively, less urgently, or with a calm that surprises you. What shocks many people here is realizing that growth did not arrive with fireworks, but with silence. Silence where compulsive explanations once lived. Silence where self-doubt once argued. This recalibration can feel disorienting because your nervous system is no longer bracing for familiar stressors. When peace arrives unexpectedly, the mind may try to manufacture problems just to regain control. Resist that impulse. This calm is not emptiness, it is coherence. Let it settle without interrogation. Backhand index pointing right type, I accept change, to claim this message. During this stage, time itself may feel altered, either stretching unusually long or compressing into fast-moving clarity. This is not imagination, it is perception shifting as your attention reorganizes. The Arcturian Council notes that when alignment increases, urgency decreases, because action no longer competes with fear. You may suddenly realize how often you rush decisions simply to relieve discomfort rather than to honor truth. That realization can sting, but it is also liberating. Regret may surface briefly, not to punish you, but to mark awareness. The shock here is recognizing how capable you are of patience when you stop fighting yourself. Let moments unfold without forcing interpretation. Presence is doing more work than effort ever could. Backhand index pointing right type, I trust the timing, to claim this message. You may now experience moments of deep emotional honesty, where feelings arise without narrative or justification. This can be unsettling because the mind prefers stories over sensations. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that this phase restores emotional sovereignty, feeling without needing permission, explanation, or defense. You may cry without sadness, smile without reason, or feel tenderness toward parts of yourself you once judged harshly. This is integration, not instability. The shock is discovering how much energy was spent managing emotions instead of experiencing them. When emotion flows freely, it does not linger destructively, it completes its cycle. Allow what surfaces to move through without labeling it as progress or setback. Completion often looks quiet. Backhand index pointing right. Type, I feel freely, to claim this message. As the signal approaches its later phase, external validation begins losing its grip. Praise may feel pleasant but unnecessary, while criticism loses its sting. This does not make you indifferent, it makes you centered. The Arcturian Council calls this internal anchoring, where self-reference replaces comparison. The shock here is realizing how much of your motivation was once borrowed from others' expectations. When those expectations dissolve, what remains is choice. True choice, unpressured and unperformed. You may notice a stronger preference for authenticity over approval, even if it means fewer explanations. This is not withdrawal, it is self-respect solidifying. Backhand index pointing right. Type, I stand in my truth, to claim this message. As this portion of the 48-hour window stabilizes, you may sense a readiness, not to act immediately, but to move differently when the moment arrives. This readiness is calm, not charged. The Arcturian Council reminds that integration often feels anticlimactic because the real shift has already happened internally. The shock is recognizing that nothing needs to be announced, proven, or rushed. You are not waiting anymore, you are available. Available to clarity, to alignment, to decisions that emerge naturally rather than forcefully. This is not the end of the transmission, but it is a grounding point. Let yourself rest here without expectation. Backhand index pointing right. Type, I am available, to claim this message. As the signal continues integrating, you may notice a subtle shift in how you relate to effort itself. Tasks that once felt heavy may suddenly feel neutral, while things you forced yourself to care about begin to fall flat. This is not laziness or loss of ambition, it is recalibration of value. The Arcturian Council explains that when alignment increases, effort becomes directional instead of draining. The shock many feel here is realizing how often they equated struggle with worthiness. When struggle dissolves, the mind may briefly panic, searching for something to prove. But nothing is missing. What is happening is refinement. Energy is no longer leaking into obligations that were never truly yours. Pay attention to what feels simple now, not easy, but simple. Simplicity is a signature of truth. Backhand index pointing right. Type, I honor my energy, to claim this message. You may now become more aware of your internal dialogue, not because it grows louder, but because it becomes clearer. Thoughts that once blended together now separate, revealing which ones are habitual echoes and which ones carry actual guidance. The Arcturian Council calls this cognitive delayering, where inherited beliefs lose their authority when exposed to present awareness. This can be shocking, as you realize how many decisions were guided by voices that were never truly yours. Guilt, obligation, and fear-based logic may attempt one last surge to reclaim control. Let them speak without obeying. Observation weakens what identification once empowered. This phase restores mental sovereignty, not by adding new beliefs, but by subtracting false ones. Backhand index pointing right type, I claim my mind, to claim this message. During this phase, synchronicities may appear, not as miracles, but as confirmations that feel oddly practical. Conversations align, information arrives unprompted, and timing smooths out in quiet ways. The shock is not that life feels magical, but that it feels cooperative. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that synchronicity is not a reward, it is feedback. It reflects internal coherence. When you stop pulling against yourself, reality stops resisting you. This can feel unfamiliar if chaos once felt normal. Trust what flows without manipulation. You are not being carried, you are walking in step. Backhand index pointing right type, I move in flow, to claim this message. You may also experience a redefinition of strength during this window. Strength no longer feels like endurance or emotional armor, but like discernment and restraint. The Arcturian Council notes that true strength emerges when reaction is no longer automatic. You may pause before responding, not because you're unsure, but because you're clear. This can surprise others who expect your old patterns. Let them adjust. The shock here is realizing that you don't need to explain your evolution for it to be valid. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes one of the most powerful expressions of alignment. Backhand index pointing right type, I am steady, to claim this message. As this segment of the transmission completes, a quiet sense of self-recognition may arise, not pride, not certainty, but familiarity. It feels like remembering something you never consciously learned. The Arcturian Council describes this as returning to baseline, where the self beneath conditioning becomes perceptible again. This is deeply grounding and strangely emotional, because it does not add anything, it restores what was always there. The shock is how normal it feels. No fireworks. No announcement. Just a calm awareness that you are no longer searching in the same way. Let this recognition settle without rushing to define it. Definition can come later. Presence is enough for now. Backhand index pointing right type, I remember, to claim this message. As the signal deepens further, you may notice that your relationship with uncertainty has changed. What once triggered anxiety may now register as openness. This is not because answers suddenly appeared, but because your nervous system is no longer demanding closure to feel safe. The Arcturian Council identifies this phase as expanded tolerance, where the unknown stops being interpreted as threat. The shock for many is realizing how much energy was spent trying to predict outcomes rather than experiencing the present. You may find yourself more willing to let conversations end without resolution, plans remain flexible, or questions stay unanswered. This is not avoidance, it is trust stabilizing. When uncertainty no longer dominates you, it becomes a creative space rather than a void. Backhand index pointing right type, I trust the unknown, to claim this message. You may also begin to sense a recalibration in how you perceive others. Judgment softens, not because boundaries disappear, but because clarity replaces projection. The Arcturian Council explains that when inner conflict reduces, the impulse to assign blame diminishes naturally. You may still recognize misalignment, but without the emotional charge that once accompanied it. This can feel shocking, especially if you identified strongly with being reactive or defensive. Compassion here does not mean tolerating what harms you, it means seeing clearly without distortion. This clarity creates emotional efficiency. You respond instead of react, and that shift changes every interaction subtly but permanently. Backhand index pointing right type, I see without projection, to claim this message. At this stage, your sense of purpose may feel less defined and yet more real. Grand narratives may lose their grip, replaced by an appreciation for precision and presence. The Arcturian Council notes that purpose often becomes quieter as alignment increases. You may stop asking, "What am I meant to do?" and start noticing, "What feels accurate right now?" This is a profound shift. The shock is realizing that purpose was never a destination, it was a way of relating to each moment. When you stop chasing meaning, meaning becomes observable. Backhand index pointing right type, I live with intent to claim this message. You may now feel an increased respect for your own limits. Rest becomes non-negotiable, overstimulation feels obvious, and your body's signals grow harder to ignore. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that integration is physical as much as mental. Ignoring the body during this phase creates friction, honoring it creates flow. The shock here is understanding that discipline does not always mean pushing, it often means stopping. When you allow yourself to pause without guilt, your system recalibrates faster than force ever could. Backhand index pointing right type, I honor my body, to claim this message. As this portion of the transmission settles, you may notice a subtle but profound shift in self-respect. Not confidence, not bravado, self-respect. You take yourself seriously without needing to convince anyone else. The Arcturian Council describes this as internal authority restoration. The shock is how quietly it arrives. You stop negotiating your truth internally, and that decision echoes outward. This is not rigidity, it is alignment becoming stable. Let this stability anchor you as the next phase approaches. Backhand index pointing right type, I respect myself, to claim this message. As the signal approaches its final compression stages, you may begin noticing a heightened sensitivity to truth expressed through language. Words that once sounded acceptable may now feel hollow, while simple statements carry unexpected weight. The Arcturian Council refers to this as linguistic resonance, where your system can no longer tolerate distortion, exaggeration, or self-betrayal in communication. This can be shocking because it removes your ability to casually agree, politely dismiss, or verbally minimize what you know internally. You may pause longer before speaking, or feel compelled to speak more directly than before. This is not bluntness, it is alignment manifesting through expression. Silence may also increase, not from withdrawal, but from discernment. You begin to understand that not every truth requires explanation, and not every conversation deserves access to your inner clarity. This recalibration strengthens integrity at a subtle but powerful level, ensuring that what you say, think, and feel begin to operate as a single coherent system rather than fragmented parts. Backhand index pointing right type, I speak in truth, to claim this message. During this phase, memory itself may reorganize. Past events may resurface, not with emotional charge, but with new context. You may suddenly understand why something happened without reliving its pain. The Arcturian Council calls this retrospective integration, where the past loses its grip because meaning replaces confusion. The shock here is realizing that healing does not always require revisiting wounds emotionally, it often requires seeing them accurately. You may feel gratitude where resentment once lived, or neutrality where blame once dominated. This does not rewrite history, it repositions you within it. When memory integrates, identity stabilizes. You are no longer reacting to who you were, you are responding as who you are now. This shift frees immense energy previously locked in unconscious processing. Backhand index pointing right type, I integrate the past, to claim this message. You may now sense a strengthening of internal rhythm, your own pace becomes clearer, less influenced by external urgency. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that alignment restores natural timing, which cannot be rushed or outsourced. The shock for many is realizing how often they abandon their rhythm to keep up with others' expectations. This phase brings a quiet refusal to move faster than clarity allows. You may slow down deliberately, even if the world around you accelerates. This is not resistance, it is regulation. When your internal rhythm stabilizes, decision-making becomes simpler, because choices no longer compete with pressure. You move when it is time, not when you are pushed. Backhand index pointing right type, I move at my pace, to claim this message. As the signal nears completion, you may notice a deeper emotional neutrality, not numbness, but balance. Emotional extremes soften, and responses feel proportional rather than overwhelming. The Arcturian Council describes this as emotional equilibrium, a state where feelings inform rather than control. The shock is realizing how dramatic emotion once felt necessary to feel alive. Now, aliveness expresses itself through presence, not intensity. You still feel deeply, but without losing center. This equilibrium allows you to engage with complexity without fragmentation, to care without depletion, and to witness without absorption. Backhand index pointing right type, I am balanced, to claim this message. At this stage, a quiet certainty may settle in, not about outcomes, but about self-trust. You no longer need guarantees to proceed, nor reassurance to pause. The Arcturian Council identifies this as self-reliant clarity, the final stabilizer before the window closes. The shock is how ordinary it feels. No revelation, no climax, just a grounded awareness that you can meet whatever comes without abandoning yourself. This is not confidence built on success, but trust built on presence. Let this trust anchor you beyond the window itself, as something permanent rather than temporary. Backhand index pointing right type, I trust myself completely, to claim this message. As the window narrows further, you may notice a heightened awareness of subtle choices, the small moments where you either align or drift. This is not pressure, it is precision. The Arcturian Council describes this phase as micro-alignment, where even minor decisions carry informational weight. You may feel a sudden aversion to habitual distractions, idle conversations, or activities that once filled space without meaning. This can feel unsettling because it exposes how often momentum replaced intention. The shock here is not restriction, but refinement. You are not losing options, you are seeing which ones were never truly yours. This phase invites conscious participation without urgency. You are not being rushed, you are being asked to notice. And noticing, when sustained, transforms behavior without force. Backhand index pointing right type, I choose awareness, to claim this message. You may now experience a recalibration of desire itself. Wants that once felt urgent may fade, while quieter longings surface without explanation. The Arcturian Council explains that desire shifts when identity stabilizes. You stop craving what compensates and begin sensing what expresses. This can be shocking because it disrupts familiar motivation structures. You may feel temporarily unmotivated, not because you lack direction, but because old incentives no longer function. This pause is not stagnation, it is reset. Allow desire to reform organically rather than forcing it into previous shapes. What emerges next will feel less dramatic but more sustaining. Backhand index pointing right type, I allow desire to reset, to claim this message. At this stage, your perception of conflict may change significantly. Situations that once demanded reaction may now appear solvable through distance, timing, or non-engagement. The Arcturian Council notes that clarity often dissolves conflict before it escalates. The shock is realizing how often confrontation was fueled by misalignment rather than necessity. You may find yourself disengaging without resentment, choosing peace without justification. This is not avoidance, it is strategic calm. When you no longer need to prove yourself, conflict loses leverage. Backhand index pointing right type, I choose peace, to claim this message. You may also notice an increase in internal coherence, thoughts, emotions, and actions aligning with less friction. Decisions feel simpler, not because life is easier, but because you are less divided. The Arcturian Council refers to this as system harmony, where internal contradictions resolve naturally. The shock here is recognizing how exhausting fragmentation once was. When alignment stabilizes, effort decreases without sacrificing effectiveness. You begin to trust your responses because they emerge from clarity rather than defense. Backhand index pointing right type, I am coherent, to claim this message. As this phase completes, a sense of quiet completion may arise, not finality, but readiness. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that readiness is not anticipation, it is availability. You are no longer bracing for change or chasing confirmation. You are present, responsive, and grounded. The shock is how little needs to happen externally for this state to feel real. Let this readiness settle into your daily awareness, not as something special, but as your new baseline. Backhand index pointing right type, I am ready, to claim this message. As the signal approaches its final phase, you may begin noticing a profound shift in how you relate to silence. Silence no longer feels empty or awkward, it feels informative. The Arcturian Council refers to this as signal saturation, where the need for constant input dissolves because integration has reached critical mass. The shock here is realizing how much noise you once relied on to avoid listening to yourself. Now, silence speaks clearly. You may find yourself pausing more often, not out of confusion, but because clarity no longer needs reinforcement. This phase can feel strangely sacred in its ordinariness. Nothing dramatic is happening, and that is the point. Integration has moved beneath the surface, where permanence forms. Backhand index pointing right type, I honor silence, to claim this message. You may also experience a shift in how you perceive the future. Instead of anticipation or anxiety, there is a neutral openness. The Arcturian Council explains that when alignment stabilizes, the future stops being a psychological destination and becomes a natural extension of the present. This can feel shocking if you were once driven by fear of what might happen or hope for what could happen. Now, planning feels practical rather than emotional. Vision becomes grounded rather than idealized. You are no longer escaping the present by thinking ahead, you are extending it forward with clarity. Backhand index pointing right type, I trust what unfolds, to claim this message. At this stage, your sense of individuality may strengthen without isolation. You feel distinct, yet connected, not merged, not separate. The Arcturian Council calls this sovereign connection, where autonomy and belonging no longer compete. The shock is realizing that independence does not require disconnection, and connection does not require self-abandonment. This recalibration allows relationships to breathe. You show up as yourself without performance, and others either meet you there or drift naturally. There is no force in this process, only truth in motion. Backhand index pointing right type, I stand whole, to claim this message. As the window nears closure, you may notice a subtle release of pressure you didn't realize you were carrying. Expectations, both internal and external, lose their grip. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that this is the moment many mistake calm for emptiness. It is not emptiness, it is unburdening. When pressure dissolves, creativity and responsiveness increase naturally. You are no longer proving readiness, you are embodying it. The shock is how light life can feel when unnecessary weight falls away. Backhand index pointing right type, I release pressure, to claim this message. In these final moments of the transmission, what remains is not instruction, warning, or promise, but recognition. You recognize yourself as someone who can meet reality directly, without distortion or retreat. The Arcturian Council does not end signals with conclusions, it ends them with stability. The shock is that nothing needs to be done next. Integration is already underway. Carry this awareness forward quietly. Let it inform, not dominate. This is not an ending, it is a recalibrated beginning. Backhand index pointing right type, I integrate, to claim this message. As the transmission reaches its final compression, you may notice that your attention naturally returns to the present moment without effort. Not mindfulness as a practice, but presence as a state. The Arcturian Council refers to this as baseline awareness, where consciousness no longer oscillates between regret and anticipation. The shock here is subtle but profound. You are here without trying to be. Your senses feel sharper, your reactions slower, and your perception steadier. Ordinary moments, walking, breathing, listening, carry a quiet richness that cannot be manufactured. This is not heightened emotion, it is stabilized perception. Many overlook this phase because it lacks drama, but it is one of the most reliable indicators that integration is complete. You are no longer processing the signal, you are operating from it. Backhand index pointing right type, I am present, to claim this message. You may now recognize a shift in how you define progress. Achievement no longer feels like accumulation, but alignment. The Arcturian Council explains that when inner systems synchronize, external progress follows naturally, without force. The shock is realizing how much striving once replaced trust. You may feel less inclined to announce goals or seek validation for direction. Movement becomes quieter, more intentional. This does not slow results, it stabilizes them. When actions emerge from coherence rather than pressure, they require less correction. You are no longer chasing momentum, momentum meets you where you stand. Backhand index pointing right type, I move with alignment to claim this message. At this stage, compassion deepens, not as obligation, but as clarity. You understand others without absorbing their chaos. The Arcturian Council calls this clear empathy, the ability to witness without merging. The shock here is realizing that empathy does not require self-sacrifice. You can care without carrying, support without fixing, listen without losing center. This recalibration changes how you show up in relationships. You offer presence instead of solutions, honesty instead of performance. This form of compassion is sustainable because it is grounded in self-respect. Backhand index pointing right type, I offer clear compassion to claim this message. As the 48-hour window completes its cycle, you may feel an absence of urgency that once drove your behavior. This absence can feel unfamiliar, even suspicious, at first. The Arcturian Council emphasizes that urgency often masks misalignment. When alignment stabilizes, urgency dissolves naturally. The shock is realizing that peace is not passive, it is efficient. From this state, action becomes precise, rest becomes restorative, and decisions become self-evident. You are no longer waiting for permission to be at ease. Ease becomes the foundation rather than the reward. Backhand index pointing right type, I release urgency to claim this message. Now, as the signal fully integrates, what remains is not a command, a mission, or a prophecy, but agency. The Arcturian Council closes this transmission with a simple acknowledgement. You are capable of sustaining this state without dependence on messages, signs, or confirmations. The shock is recognizing that the true activation was not external at all, it was a return to internal authority. Carry this forward quietly. Let it shape how you listen, choose, rest, and respond. The window has done its work. What unfolds next is not dictated, it is lived. Backhand index pointing right type, I claim my authority to claim this message.